In sports, one moment can change everything. One play, one choice, one fan. And the whole city starts clamoring for blood. This is the story of how one man bore the burden and the frustration of an entire city, and further perpetuated an almost century-long curse. This is Steve Bartman's infamous catch that cost the Cubs the World Series. The Chicago Cubs were 5 outs from the World Series, a place they hadn't seen in almost 60 years. And then, perhaps being moved by forces beyond our realm, Steve Bartman showed up. But to understand what really happened, we need to rewind time to 1908. Yep, that far back, because we need to understand the curse. Before we continue, if you haven't hit the subscribe button, smash it right now to avoid missing any amazing baseball stories. Now, back to our story. In that year, the Cubs beat out the Detroit Tigers, led up by up-and-coming Ty Cobb, to win their second consecutive championship. But that would be the last time they'd know baseball's highest glory for over 100 years. Then came the curse. In 1945, the Cubs were back in the World Series, facing the Detroit Tigers once more. And that's when Billy Sanis, proprietor of the Billy Goat Tavern, tried to bring his pet goat into Wrigley Field. Security turned him away, and legend has it that Sanis cursed the Cubs, vowing they'd never win again. Everyone thought he was mad, but the following years proved that maybe he was right. It wasn't a tiger that was the Cubs' undoing, it was a tavern owner with his pet goat. Cursed? The Cubs had a dark cloud hovering over their heads everywhere they went. What followed was a century of disappointment, collapses, blown leads, and inexplicable events. The Cubs were so jinxed they had it all: black cats, Lennon Durham's '84 error, the stomach-churning loss in '89, and the 1969 collapse when the Mets swept them. Every time the Cubs were there, something went wrong, and by 2003, it had been 95 years. But that year didn't taste like the others. The Cubs had one of the league's scariest pitching duos, Mark Prior and Kerry Wood. Both were young, powerful, and dominant. Prior had an electric fastball with pinpoint accuracy. Wood, the man who once struck out 20 batters in the game, was a force of nature. Offensively, they had their ace in the hole, Sammy Sosa, the heart and soul of the Cubs. A former MVP, a home run specialist, and the guy who made Wrigley Field a circus every time he stepped up to the plate. The Cubs took the National League Central and headed to the postseason as a force to be reckoned with. However, Cub fans were careful to give their hearts again. They had been broken so many times, but the Cubs assured them they'll protect their hearts. In the division series, the Cubs played the Atlanta Braves, a team stacked with veterans and postseason experience. The Cubs defeated them in a 5-game series that was nothing short of glorious. They were in the National League Championship Series for the first time since 1989. The city of Chicago was alive. The Cubs were optimistic. They were good. The magic was tangible. And they were just 5 outs from breaking the curse. But this curse was more sinister than they thought, waiting for the right time to strike, and on October 14th, 2003, it did. The Cubs hosting the Florida Marlins in Game 6 of the National League Championship Series win this, and they're bound for the World Series. Only 5 outs from victory, and they'll be free from the curse. But then, it happened. Castillo, the Marlins' leadoff hitter, came up. The count went to 3-2. Prior threw the pitch, and Castillo hit a high fly ball down the left field line. It looked like it might be playable. Moises Alou, the Cubs' left fielder, gave chase, leading toward the wall. He reached out to try to make the catch, but just as his glove was closing on the ball, a fan reached out. His hand made contact with the ball before Alou's glove could, and just like that, it was gone. Moises Alou was furious. He turned around, yelling, throwing his arms up in frustration. He knew that was an out. That might have been the second out of the inning. Instead, it was just a foul ball. And then the cameras found him, Steve Bartman, a lifelong Cubs fan, just 26 years old. he had no idea he'd soon become the most hated man in Chicago. On the next pitch, Pryor threw a wild pitch. Castillo walked. Then a routine ground ball to short, error. Now the Marlins had the bases loaded and the Cubs' meltdown was in full bloom. A double, a single, another error, hit after hit. When the dust finally settled, the Marlins had plated 8 runs in the inning. The Cubs' lead was gone. Wrigley Field was quiet. The madness followed. And Steve Bartman was scapegoated. Normally, a scapegoat refers to a player who has been ostracized by a fan base for a mistake. But this time around, it was another fan who felt the brunt of an entire fan base. Fans turned on him immediately, screaming and throwing beer. Security had to escort him out of the stadium for his safety. By the end of the game, Bartman's personal information had been posted online MLB message boards, resulting in several cop cars being sent to protect his house in Illinois. Even then Governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich, joined in the jokes by offering Bartman a spot in a witness protection program. Then Governor of the winning team's state of Florida, Jeb Bush, would even offer asylum to Bartman. The Cubs still had a last hope, Game 7, but the magic didn't exist anymore. They lost and the Marlins won the World Series. The Cubs had once again been denied victory after coming so close. The curse held on to the Cubs for a very long time. Years passed and the curse lived on. 2008, swept. 2015, a solid season, but no championship. But then 2016 arrived. 108 years of waiting. Game 7 of the World Series. The Cubs were finally on the cusp. And after a heart-stopping extra inning battle, they did it. The Cubs won the World Series. As for Steve Bartman, Bartman kept a low profile. Apart from the message he released straight after the game, there are a few words to describe how awful I feel and what I've experienced within these last 24 hours. His life was forever changed. He went to hiding, death threats surrounded him, and his name was forever attached to the Cubs' misfortune. But was he to blame? Or was the curse simply too strong? What was the aftermath? The Cubs franchise made peace with him from the form of a championship ring. He remained silent, eternally tied to one of baseball's greatest disgraces. Nonetheless, the Cubs and other players refused to blame Steve. It was just one moment, and every other thing that followed wasn't on him. As for Moises Alou, he had several comments about the incident afterwards. Moises Alou was enraged after Castillo's foul ball ricocheted off Bartman's left hand. Would he have caught it? Initially, he said that he would have. And then in 2008, he told the Associated Press, "Wherever I go, even today, people still yell, 'Bartman! Bartman!' I feel horrible." Do you know what the funny thing is? I wouldn't have gotten it anyway. A few months later, Alou backtracked again. If I did say that, I was probably joking to attempt to make Bartman feel better. Maybe it's just the competitor in him. In 2016, after the Cubs World Series championship, he told Tribune reporter Mark Gonzalez that he would have caught the ball, but it don't matter anymore. I got upset at the time. Sometimes some things in sports cannot be explained. Maybe the curse was real, maybe not. But the Cubs were titleless for a century, and it's hard to wrap your head around that. However, one thing is true. One fan's zealous hands didn't steal their fate. Yet for more than a decade, Steve Bartman bore the weight of a century of pain. It was hard for him to get out in public. Death threats and public humiliation followed him everywhere. Sometimes I wonder who was more cursed, Steve or the Cubs. In the end, the Cubs finally got their title, and for Chicago, that was all that ever mattered. So, what do you think? Do you believe the curse was a real thing? Or was it just a psychological thing? More importantly, did Bartman deserve all the hate he got? Let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button. Until next time.